Hello, welcome to Principles of Macroeconomics. This is lecture 2, and today we're going to talk about key concepts. Now again, go to Laulima and download the slides, so it will be easier for you to follow. And when you open your slides, you see first the fundamental economic belief. So I would like to start from something that all economists agree now. Now, it's not something, this fundamental economic belief, it's not something very popular. It's, if you Google that, you won't probably find it, because it's my definition of the statement that all economists agree in this time of disagreement. And that's a good place to start and decompose where we see the problems. To start from the place what we agree on. And it sounds like this. If markets are competitive and there are no non-monetary outcomes of the market transaction, then the best outcome could be achieved with a free market. That's a quite difficult statement, and we're going to decompose it. So you need to make sure at the end of this lecture that you know all the words in this definition and what do they mean. First, if markets are competitive, which means we need to know what is a competitive market, what is a monopolistic market, and what types of market exist. Now that's a primary question, or one of the primary questions of microeconomics. So if you took a microeconomic class, you probably have some idea about what markets are competitive and what are not. But if you didn't, you might not know anything about it. So let's talk about it. Competition versus monopoly is the fundamental state of basically markets. Competition is characterized by the situation where you have a lot of producers of the same good and a lot of consumers of the same good. So let's, for example, think of, apple juice. You go to a store and you have quite a variety of apple juices. If you go to another store, you might have even different varieties. So overall, as a consumer, you can choose a store and then you can choose a type of apple juice you like along quite a wide range of suppliers. That indicates a competitive market, or at least visually indicates a competitive market. Now, basic example, if you buy your utility bill, if you rent an apartment or your parents rent an apartment, every month you got a utility bill. In Hawaii, in Oahu specifically, it's HECO. It comes from FECO. Now here, you don't have any choice. You have only one supplier, and this is a case of monopoly. One supplier, HECO, provides you electricity. If you don't like HECO, you might install solar panels and so on, but that will not allow you to get rid of HECO anyway, because you will need electricity at night. You'll still need to cooperate with them. You don't have any choice of suppliers. Now, thus, state of the market is fundamental for everything we think about that market in future and in economy in general. And we all economists agree that, as mentioned there, that if the markets are competitive, there is a chance. So we'll get to the second part later. But there is a chance that the free market, meaning unregulated, just as it is, without any government interference, that market would function in the best possible way for a consumer. Now, that happens because companies compete with each other, and so they cannot charge too much, because then competitors will charge less and you will prefer a cheaper good compared to a more expensive one. So a competitive state of the market is fundamentally important for the market to be efficient and free. So as I mentioned before, we study what government should do or should not do, and if the market is competitive, then the government shouldn't do anything if there are non-monetary outcomes, but we'll get to that. But from a price perspective, at least, the competitive market gives consumers the best price. And so there is no need for government price regulation. On the opposite, if we talk about HECO as a monopolist on the island, or for a couple islands, other islands actually too, we have, so the price of electricity, especially electricity, is very important. You know, it's not something you choose to buy. You have to have electricity, otherwise you'll live like 200 years ago. So it's not like a luxury good that you buy or don't buy, and it doesn't really matter. It's not some fashion statement. It's a very fundamental good. Now, HECO as a monopolist can charge you anything for electricity and you will still pay. That's a case of monopoly. They can charge any price they want and you will still pay in case of electricity. In case of other goods like apple juice, monopoly is still bad because they will still charge you more, maybe not infinitely more, but they will charge you more than you would rather pay for the apple juice, and they will have excessive profits. So monopoly is good for business and competition is good for consumers. Now the government stands in this battle on consumers, or at least supposed to stand on the consumer side, as it's basically fundamental of democracy. We are all consumers, while a business is just one corporation. So the government should stand on the consumer side to protect all of us from being abused by corporation. Another thing is that consumers in any market, because we always have a lot of consumers basically in most of the market. There are some exceptions where there is just few consumers and there is a monopolistic position on a consumer side. But we will not talk about that. That's a rare market. Mostly we talk about the markets where we are all consumers, like groceries, electricity. And so there is a competition on the demand side, and so the government should step in and protect that, basically step on the competitive side against the suppliers. Because suppliers can either also be competitive, then nothing should be done, or they can be a monopoly, then monopoly will abuse the competitive demand. And so with HECO, there is a government regulation, there is a state agreement with HECO that they will not charge over a certain amount. There is a very complex agreement that will move to renewables in certain pace. Then the prices will be in certain range. The price, HECO doesn't basically control everything, like oil prices are international commodities, so they depend on international markets. So we cannot fix the price, but we can develop a certain formula for the price that will allow HECO to operate, but also will protect the consumers from this monopoly. Now, practically, if that agreement is perfect or not, it's quite hard to tell. But at least on the this principle level, what we should know is that there should be a government interference in a case of monopoly on a very basic needs. If the product of that market is very essential, like electricity or education or food. If there is certain monopoly on a basic needs market, there should be government interference. That's a part of that fundamental economic belief. So if markets are competitive, there should be free market. I mean, we get to non-monetary outcomes. But in general, from a just price perspective, free markets are okay. If markets are not competitive, and specifically if there is a monopoly, just one producer, then there probably should be market interference. Now, it turned recently, I mean last 30 years, it getting more and more harder to define this competition. Like with apple juice, it's more or less clear. But for example, there is a very famous case in management or marketing, if you're going to study, about the glasses, the eye glasses. You go to Walmart, Costco, whatever, any store, and you see great, incredible variety of brands for glasses. And even brands of glasses are different, hundreds of them, literally. Then you have different stores. You go to Walmart, there is like a Walmart store with maybe some name there, and there are some specific stores, and it looks like a competitive market to all of us, because there are different brands everywhere, different stores, different in prices, but you would be surprised that all of them belong to just one company. So all those different brands, different types, this illusion of choice is actually, there is no choice, because almost 80% of the market of all the eyeglasses in the United States are sold by just one company. So all the brands just accumulated into one company, which is a case of monopoly. Not 100% monopoly, but if one company dominates the market, meaning even more than 60% or 60% and more, it's already a case of monopoly, because there is one huge player that will abuse other companies that are on the market, and it still has market power to charge extra. And that's why if you take eyeglasses in the United States and compare them to other developed countries, you will find out that the price is quite different. Me, as I wear eyeglasses, I realize that you can buy in Germany exactly same glasses more than twice cheaper, and that's phenomenal, because Germany is not like a cheap place otherwise, but in this particular market, the monopoly that this established in US created this problem. And there is no government interference in this case, and that's partly because we actually disagree on how to define competitive markets. And there are, even though from economic theory there should be competitive market, there are a lot of economists, I would say more than half of macroeconomists, that support basically even that are against government interference even in case of monopoly, unless it's like electricity. I don't think anyone will argue against that, but maybe some will even argue against interference in such markets. But with eyeglasses, they think that's not really your basic need, even though those people who need it really need it. But you can always get some cheap frame for like the cheapest possible frame for less than $10, which is not part of the entire industry of branded eyeglasses. But so there are a lot of economists that believe that the market shouldn't be fair, that the company should basically charge extra for consumers. Most of those economists have certain political goals. They're members of certain political groups that support business. They got paid for business, and that's part of the larger issue, which is not even part of macroeconomics, but that's very important, which is this bias. If you got paid, let's say you're a professor, usually it's top universities, because our discipline, as any other academic discipline, we borrow not the structure and the ideas we borrow from top institutions like Harvard, MIT, Berkeley. They define to a large extent how the discipline develops. And so those professors there, they get paid a lot by business for their opinion, or for their research, in many cases their opinion about monopoly. For example, if you got paid $100,000 to believe that there shouldn't be interference on a certain monopolistic market, that is not very objective, but that's a case quite often, and you would be surprised how often it is, because government use academic economists to justify certain laws and policies. That's a common practice in not just economics, but in general. So if there's some policy debate, it is common to invite academics, people from academia, to justify, and they're seen as objective experts. But sometimes in economics they're not, and there are proven cases of such conflict of interest. So if you got paid by a company, you stop being objective. So this problem with competition and monopoly is not so easy as in textbook. Oh, there are many suppliers, competition, there is one supplier, monopoly, then the government should do something. In reality, a lot of economists go against that because of this bias, and we have in reality a lot of problems related to monopoly, specifically now. So every time you hear about mergers and acquisitions, and sounds very exciting, but it also a sign of that the larger the companies get, the more opportunities to hurt us as consumers they have. And that's quite dangerous. We have a lot of conglomerates in the news. That's part of the problem as well. You think you have diversity of news, but actually you don't, because there are large groups that hold their TV channels, newspapers, and other media, and they control how the media works. So that is also bias. So the case of monopoly is basically, if I need to summarize the entire macroeconomic course in one lecture, I would dedicate it to this problem, competition versus monopoly. Because even though it's actually a micro problem, because each particular market and companies on the market face either competition or monopoly or something in between. If you're gonna study micro, you'll study there is like oligopoly and monopolistic competition. So there are things in between, but it's still, if there is competition, pure competition, that's the only case when you can allow free markets actually be efficient. All other tend to be more monopolistic, so the government has to be more careful. Sometimes again, luxury goods, we really don't care if there is a monopoly, and there are some, like Louis Vuitton brand and company, they have quite a lot of monopolic niche, but that's a luxury brand. No one will die if Louis Vuitton prices are excessive. Everybody knows that, but it's a luxury good. It's not something vital like electricity or food, so that market could be just left alone. On the other hand, vital goods, we should really consider how important they are. So now let's move to the second part, which are there are no non-monetary outcomes of the market transaction. That is very hard to process even for established economists, because it's a very new vision on the market transaction. That appeared again just maybe last 20 years, maybe even last 10 years. It's quite recent, but it very important. It's very important. So traditional theory think that you go to shop, to Walmart again, buy an apple juice, and that transaction was seen only in monetary terms. So you buy apple juice, let's say you pay $2 for that juice, and what is analyzed? Well, $2 as a price. Is it fair? How much money the company actually make? What were the cost of that juice? Let's say it was $1.50, so 50 cents the profit, and then the other part, what is the utility of the juice for you? Let's say, would you pay $2.50? Maybe how much were you ready to pay for the juice? Maybe you were ready to pay $3. So basically you won $1 because you would pay $3 for that juice, but it was $2, so you're happy. You got like saved. You're not actually saved, but you got it $1 cheaper that you would pay. So those things are the fundamental of this neoclassical mainstream view. It all related to this money, the price established between the supply and demand. So I hope you saw this supply demand graph. If not, you can just Google it. It's very simple and quite one of the things in the economics in general that is presented the economic system. We have supply, which is growing with the price, and then we have demand that goes down with the price go up. So the price for juice, let's say, jumps from $2 to $10. Producers will be happy. That's pure logic. Producers will be happy and consumers will not be happy. So consumers will buy less and switch maybe to other type of juice or just drink water. And producers will produce more because now there is a way more opportunities to produce apple juice, because before you were making just $2, so your cost should be just below $2 to make some money. Now, if you're not that efficient, let's say you would have produced apple juice if the price was $3. So now it's $10. You still can make good profit. You choose to produce. So supply increase with prices, demand decrease with prices, and the price meets basically in equilibrium of supply and demand. That's the fundamental view of this mainstream economy. And it's all about the price. Now, what it turned out, especially in the recent, as I mentioned, 10 years, that there are non-monetary outcomes of this transaction that are like spillover effects. They're not that obvious, because you go to store and you buy apple juice, you think on a price. You don't think of things like US employment or national employment or social balance or sustainability or effects on environment. But more and more people start thinking about that, mostly because we really harmed all those things by not ignoring them for so long. So now Maybe let's talk about cars. You buy cars that are made in US, not just because thinking of price. So there is a price effect that we talk about, but when you buy a car made in US, you support US employment. You support people who work in US indirectly, not just directly, but through the fact that that car was manufactured in the United States. It provides US employers with jobs. You supported that with that transaction. And if you buy a Japanese car, you will support people who work in Japan. Now be careful that the brands are not indicators where the cars are made. So we have Toyotas made in US and BMWs made in US as well. So it doesn't mean the brand, but I mean if the car is actually produced in US compared to a car that actually was assembled in another country, your decision to buy one car or another affects employment in that country indirectly. But this is a non-monetary outcome. It's very hard to quantify. That's why it's non-monetary. It's just the fact that people have more jobs and less jobs, and it's a very complicated chain of events. So in terms of money, it's very hard to follow it. So we call it non-monetary outcome. Well, let's look at electricity in Hawaii. It's very urgent topic. So if you buy it from HECO, they burn oil and pollute the environment. If you put a solar panel and let's say the price is the same, for sake of argument, you put a solar panel, you buy it from a solar company or a wind company, that's a clean energy. So in the first case, you indirectly, your market decision, your consumption harms environment. While in the second case, you support the environment as it's clean energy. So your market transaction again has a non-monetary outcome. You either support environment or you harm environment. And for years that was ignored, which resulted in climate change and a lot of various environmental problems. And now economists try, especially these new economists, they try to bring those things are important. And if you look on the spectrum of economic problems, most of them are related to these things. To employment, we have problems with employment. Why? Because we constantly, for the entire history of economics, basically, we ignored the impact of our decisions, and the markets and the regulators and the entire economic system was ignoring this impact on employment. The same with environment. It was ignored until recently. Similar with sustainability, partly it's environmental sustainability, but there is also financial sustainability, which is a huge issue in the United States. It's whether you buy it with loans or you buy it with your own money. And it, for generations, it was believed that if you have additional option to whatever, if you have option A, option B, if I add option C to this on the market, then you will be better off because you still have option A and you still have option B. I just added option C. That was a justification for promotion of mortgage loans because, well, everyone can choose to buy a house with cash or to buy a house using mortgage loans. So this will be like option, additional option, which should make you better off. But what happened, what wasn't forecasted, but that was a non-monetary outcome related to first incentives and second sustainability. What happened? That more and more people start using loans, which has driven the prices of real estate, again, very relative to Hawaii, as well as New Jersey and pretty much any good place. the price of real estate skyrocketed because there are pretty much no one left who buy house without mortgage. We all use mortgage, which allow us to have more money at place in the beginning, and it increased the price of real estate, which hurts our sustainability and also creates a wrong incentive, but we're gonna leave that for now. Now, if you take, for example, Italy, especially southern Italy or Greece, you would be surprised with the prices of houses there. They're way cheaper. Like you can buy a decent house for $50,000, $100,000 give you like a mansion, not on the beach in the luxury area, but if you decent house to live, you can get for $100,000. I mean, really good house in a nice neighborhood. So it's and they're cheap because there is no much of this mortgage loan culture. People tend to buy houses with their own money or inherit houses and then build them. So and this decreased the possibility of demand. Just people don't have $800,000 in cash on average to buy a house. So if the prices were like in Hawaii, no one would ever buy anything in Greece or Italy. So the price just go down because the cost of a house actually is way not that large. The cost of house with modern materials maybe $50,000 of, and it's the same in US and in Greece, actual house. So what you pay is for the land, and price of land directly depends on the demand. The land is fixed and it's kind of free, or used to be. It's not something that someone invested and get it like a house. A house you need to build, you need materials, you won't get it from nowhere. So there is certain cost. But land, it came from nowhere, and maybe someone bought it 100 years ago, or it belongs to the state that technically you can just rent it from a state. In again Greece and Italy, there's still a lot of undeveloped places in certain neighborhoods. So for Hawaii, well, if you look at other islands like Molokai or other islands, I bet you can find undeveloped land that you can probably rent relatively cheap, especially if you justify it to the state government in certain, if you have a nice justification that you won't build a hotel there, but you actually provide some affordable housing for local people, that would be a good reason to get land cheaper. But because of these mortgage loans, we got the price out of reach. We don't even think that we can, well, we used to be able to buy a house with our own cash. That was the only option. And then the prices were really cheap. So that is, it's quite complicated and maybe hard to process for you. No. Sorry about that. It's a little distraction. But I hope you get it. So we need to be in this time nowadays. We need to be very careful with these spillover effects and things that we thought are good, like a mortgage loan. It's an opportunity for people who don't have cash right away to buy a house. That was sound like a noble idea. It resulted in the fact that it's still hard to buy a house now for everyone, even with a mortgage loan, but the prices are just way higher than the income that we have. Now, the next thing, essential concept we have is technological progress. Now, technological progress, we all have these benefits. We have computers, everything is in our phone right now. We all know it, but we need to understand what it means from economic perspective. From economic perspective, technological progress means that we need less resources to produce same amount of goods as before, which means things are getting cheaper and cheaper with time. And this partly, but probably major impact of technological progress, is that those non-monetary outcomes became essentially essential just recently. Because, if you go back in 1950s, after Second World War, economy is destroyed, no one has pretty much nothing. So people were not very concerned with like environment or social balance. And that also, everyone was kind of poor, so there was not that many problems as we have now. Back in those days, people just have job, they do the job, and they build up the economy. Now, what happened with technological progress? We have some things became really cheaper for us, so we start care more about other things like environment and social balance. But at the same time, because the capital, it's in a way we did some things became cheaper, but we still have even larger income. And what it result is those real estate prices, education prices. So there are some things, specifically goods, became cheaper, or at least became way of better quality. But some things that are not kind of that related to technological progress, specifically real estate, again, education, they became very expensive. And that creates certain social imbalances that, again, were not addressed because 50 years ago, 70 years ago, when these theories crystallized, it was very simple. You don't, after Second World War, again, you don't have a TV, you don't have furniture in your house, so you work, you got some money, and then you spend it on certain basic goods, what we now have. And you don't have much money for college or other things. So those things that we have now, like again, environment, they were quite cheap. And I mean, education and environment impacts were quite low because we didn't have much production. And in certain areas, they were just, we just ignored and polluted the environment, as coal mines and steel production did with the rivers in US. But in particular, a lot of things, again, real estate and education, they were quite cheap because we just didn't have any money as a society. Now, with technological progress, we got more money, we got most of goods cheaper, and so to balance it out in a way, we have really huge misbalance with real estate, education, infrastructure, very weird things. We have some things really expensive, some things cheaper. So the point is that we need to account this technological progress, but we don't really know a good way to do that, and economists haven't thought about this in a proper way, from my personal opinion. So we don't have much tools to that, but that explains why all theories don't work right now. So what we need to know about technological progress is that first, it makes things cheaper because to produce the same thing we need less resources. But it's one. And second one, that it changed the way our economy is, and partly, and to a large extent actually, that change is behind the problems with economic theory that was developed in 60s as it is now, and nowadays economy, because economy changed due to technological progress, and theory didn't account for that technological progress and changes that came. So Last, you can see economic schools. We have, to summarize, we have a neoclassical or mainstream economic school. That is the theory that I mentioned, just crystallized in the 60s and hasn't changed much since then. It developed something on top of that, but if you take microeconomic textbook from 1970 and the one that you use now, you will be surprised that it's all kind of the same. Nothing really changed. And the same with macroeconomics. And that's a problem. Everything else has changed dramatically and our economic textbook hadn't changed. So luckily we have the another school. We have Keynesian, which is an older alternative school, but these days they kind of mix with a new economic thinking school, which is an actual organization called Institute for New Economic Thinking. It's a bit too advanced probably for you, but just to give a reason why we call it like this, there is just a real institution which combines those ideas. It's a source of all new ideas and critiques of the mainstream theory. And Keynesian idea was also very practical, to say that this idea of just looking on the price and believing that everything is balanced out without any problems is destructive. That economy is not like that. In particular, Keynes brought the business cycle, the growth and the crisis. And his idea was that it is driven by expectations, that people have expectations, and during the growth, they believe it will always be better than before, which is not realistic. At some point, it won't be that good as before, but people turn to be too optimistic and they go way too high. And in crisis, they do the same mistake. They think that things will be worse and worse, and they won't get better. And so they're too conservative. They do not spend money. They try to think of the worst possible scenario during the crisis, and so they push the economy to the bottom as well. That, in particular, Keynes then argued that government should play a larger role, not just regulating monopolies, but in general observing the economy pattern and see when the economy is going too fast, like there's too much optimism and fundamentals are not that strong, the government should, cool down. And there are certain means that we know about. We'll talk about this, how to cool down the economy. And if the economy is in crisis, that is more relevant because unfortunately no one used the cool down part, and we all always end up in the crisis. But in the crisis, there is a very weird situation where mainstream economy says you don't do anything, because that's basically their logic. You don't do anything at any time, just let the market decide. But when there is a crisis, imagine politicians come and say, well, our theory says we just don't do anything and just wait until the crisis is over. That won't be a very beneficial decision for politicians to say. So even those mainstream economists during the crisis suddenly all become Keynesian economists and say, well, we can use the Keynesian strategy to get out of the crisis. But we will learn what it is, how it works. But unfortunately, it would be nice if you follow the Keynesian logic during the growth time too. Then we would have less severe crisis and more stable economy, because that is a growth and crisis business cycle. It's not just crisis and then we switch to neoclassical and then another crisis. That is like a mixed logic of two, which is not logical overall from any perspective, but that's the reality because it's influenced by politicians particularly, and that's how it is. So that's a key concept that we're going to build on. And we're going to stop here and continue with the indicators next time. Thank you.